Flames devour the cockpit around me. Orange tongues of fire reflect off the instrument panel as acrid black smoke billows into my face. I can barely see, my eyes stinging and watering, but I know I'm out of time. The small two-seater plane I'm piloting is only seconds away from becoming a flying coffin. Heat sears my legs and hands. My right shoulder feels like it's on fire, because it is. The synthetic material of my flight suit is melting into my skin. The roar of the engine is now a tortured shriek, and every warning alarm in the cockpit is blaring in a deafening chorus. I hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, threatening to drown out rational thought. Focus. I grit my teeth, struggling to remember my training. Fly the damn aircraft. The instructor's voice echoes in my head, a lifeline of calm in the chaos. My left hand clenches the stick, trying to keep the plane level, while my right fumbles for the fuel shutoff. I yank the mixture lever to idle and flick off the magneto switches. The engine sputters and falls silent, but the wind still whistles past the canopy as we glide. The flames, however, roar on unabated, feeding on plastic, fuel, and oxygen. The altimeter unwinds rapidly. 300 feet. 250. 200. Through the haze I catch a blur of green and brown rushing up at me. The ground, coming up far too fast. The runway is off to my right, but I'll never reach it. Instead, I aim the dying aircraft toward a flat stretch of open grass just beyond the tarmac. This is going to be a rough landing, if I survive to land at all. I cough, gagging on the toxic smoke. My lungs burn with each shallow breath. This is real. Not a drill, not a nightmare reel. I'm maybe 150 feet above the ground now, roughly the height of a 4-story building. If I don't get out, I'll hit the ground trapped inside and burn alive on impact. My hands tremble, but I force myself to move. With my left hand still holding the control stick, I use my right to slam the canopy latch open. The metal handle scalds my palm, but adrenaline dulls the pain. Come on, come on. I rasp, voice raw. The latch finally releases. I throw my shoulder upward, ramming the side of the canopy door. It pops open, and a blast of air howls into the cockpit, fanning the flames even higher for one terrifying second. 50 feet to go. The grassy field ahead fills my vision. Flames lick at my face. I can feel my hair on the right side singeing. I squeeze my eyes shut for an instant as an ember sparks against my cheek. No time to flinch. No time to be afraid. I slap the seatbelt release and shove myself upward against the howling wind. I'm halfway out of the cockpit now, the slipstream threatening to rip me away. I scramble, hauling my body through the open side door. Suddenly, I find myself crouching on the left wing of a plane that is still skimming the ground at over 30 knots. The wind is a physical force, battering my body, and the fire streaming from the engine blows over me in a scorching veil. I turn my face away from the searing heat, closing my right eye and squinting through my left to time my jump. The ground is a blur of green just below. So close, but still not close enough to stop this from hurting. I take one final breath of scorching, smoke-filled air and leap. I wasn't always a man moments from death, clinging to a burning aircraft. To understand how I ended up in that nightmare, you have to know where it all began. From the time I was a young boy, I had been in love with the idea of flight. One of my earliest memories is standing at the chain-link fence of Luton Airport on a drizzly afternoon, my small hands curled through the wire as I watched a jet roar down the runway. I was maybe 6 or 7, and I refused to cover my ears from the thundering engine noise. I wanted to hear and feel everything. The whoosh of a plane lifting off, the jet wash fluttering my clothes, the intoxicating scent of kerosene mixed with rain on hot tarmac. To me, that was the smell of adventure. My grandfather, a World War II veteran who had trained as a pilot at the tail end of the war, would chuckle at my wide-eyed wonder. He often took me to that little viewing area at Luton, sharing stories about navigation and the thrill of soaring above the clouds. He never flew in combat, the war ended before he finished training, but his love for flying remained. Like a spark passing from one generation to the next, I caught the bug. I remember tugging on his sleeve as a sleek commercial airliner roared overhead and asking, "Grandpa, can anyone learn to fly a plane?" He smiled, eyes reflecting the sky. "If they wanted enough, Jamie, absolutely," he said. "One day it could be you up there." From that moment on, a tiny voice inside me kept whispering that I would one day be at the controls of a plane. Life took many turns as I grew up, and I didn't head straight into aviation. In fact, my 20s saw me in a very different role. I became a soldier. By my early 30s, I was a reservist in the British Army Special Forces, a proud member of 21 SAS Regiment. The military taught me discipline, resilience, how to stay calm under pressure. I jumped out of planes as a paratrooper, survived in harsh environments, pushed my body beyond its limits. I loved serving my country, and it gave me purpose, but that childhood dream of flying never left me. It hung in the background, patient but insistent. Eventually, I knew I had to chase it. I was 32 years old, thinking, if not now, when? So I made a plan to earn my private pilot's license. With my military commitments winding down and some savings squirreled away, I researched flight schools. I found a well-regarded program in Kissimmee, Florida, just outside Orlando, where the weather was sunny and perfect for flying most of the year. It was a leap of faith, leaving home in the UK to train in the US, but I've never been one to shy from adventure. I secured the visas, packed my bags, and in the summer of 2007 I stepped into the dense Florida heat, ready to finally turn my childhood dream into reality. Training to be a pilot was everything I hoped for and more. Every morning I woke up with a jolt of excitement and a healthy dose of nerves as I pulled on a light shirt and shorts and drove to the airfield. The flight school was a modest cluster of hangars and classrooms by a long runway. Palm trees swayed in the humid breeze. The air smelled of cut grass and distant jet fuel. It felt like heaven. I remember my first lesson vividly. My instructor walked me around a little Cessna trainer as we performed the pre-flight checks together. My heart thrummed as I slid into the left seat and started the engine. We taxied to the runway, and moments later we were racing down the tarmac. When the wheels finally lifted off, I felt the purest thrill. I hooped as the horizon fell away, and the plane climbed skyward. The freedom was intoxicating. I trained hard over the next weeks, learning navigation, emergency procedures, and the feel of the aircraft. The instructors saw I was serious and disciplined. Ex-military guys tend to impress flight teachers with our checklist obsession. Before long, I was flying solo. 8 days earlier, I had completed my first solo flight as a student pilot, touching down safely 3 times while my instructor watched proudly from the ground. I was elated and full of confidence. I truly felt on top of the world. Over the following days, I continued flying solo, steadily building my required flight hours. Each uneventful flight boosted my confidence. I daydreamed about earning my license and one day taking my family up in a little plane over the English countryside. I was so close to achieving what I'd dreamed of since that boyhood afternoon at Luton. That fateful day began like any other. It was what pilots call a bluebird day, a cloudless sky, brilliant sun, the air smooth and still. Early that morning I arrived at the airfield, eager to beat the worst of the Florida heat. I had a Piper PA-28 two-seater aircraft booked for a solo cross-country practice flight. The air was cool and smelled of dew and jet fuel. Birds chirped in the palmettos by the hangar, everything peaceful and routine. I performed my pre-flight inspection meticulously as always. Fuel tanks full, oil level good, control surfaces moving freely, flaps and lights all working. The little low-wing Piper looked perfect. I climbed into the cockpit, buckled in, and ran through the startup checklist. The engine fired up with a satisfying rumble. Soon I was taxiing to the active runway, focusing on the tasks at hand, utterly unaware of the nightmare ahead. After getting takeoff clearance, I lined up and pushed the throttle to full. The plane gathered speed, the wings eager to fly. At 60 knots I eased back on the yoke, and just like that, I was airborne again. The morning sun flooded into the cockpit as I climbed out, and I couldn't help but smile. It was the exact kind of day you imagined when you dreamed about flying. Within minutes I was at 1,000 feet, leveling off to cruise toward my first waypoint. Everything was smooth and normal. I was mentally reviewing the next steps in my navigation plan when a flicker of orange at the edge of my vision caught my attention. I was just about to bank the plane when I saw it, a flicker of color that didn't belong. Out of the corner of my eye, against the backdrop of perfect blue sky, a thin streak of yellow-orange trailed from the engine cowling on the left side. My brain did a confused stutter. What the? I craned my neck to look out the left side of the canopy, heart suddenly thumping. For a second, I couldn't process what I was seeing. A ribbon of flame, bright and alive, was rippling along the fuselage just behind the propeller. I blinked hard, hoping it was a trick of the light. But then came another flicker, and with it a tendril of black smoke. In an instant, reality crystallized. The engine was on fire. My stomach plunged. A flash of pure animal terror shot through me. Oh God! I gasped. Planes do not just catch fire in midair under normal circumstances. Yet here I was, alone at 1,000 feet, with flames curling out of my engine compartment. A chemical smell of burning oil hit me, confirming the nightmare. For one paralyzing heartbeat, I froze. My mind conjured the most horrific images, a fuel tank explosion, the cockpit turning into an oven, me trapped and burning. Panic clawed at me. A small, desperate sound escaped my throat. Then, somewhere amid the rising horror, that instructor's voice rang out again. Above all, fly the damn aircraft. Right. Fly. I snapped back into the moment, adrenaline flooding my system. My training wasn't just for show. I had drilled emergency procedures for engine failure and even fires. Not real fires, but I knew the theory. Now I had to execute fast. My right hand slammed the throttle, closed to stop feeding fuel to the blaze. With my left I held the yoke steady, fighting the plane's tendency to yaw and roll now that hell was breaking loose. The little craft shuddered, whether from the fire's effect or my own trembling, I couldn't tell. I stamped on the rudder to counter a skid as the nose tried to swing. The altimeter was already unwinding, 900 feet, 850. We were descending, engine or not. I needed to land immediately. Below, the flat Florida landscape was a patchwork of green fields, a highway ribbon in the distance, and the gray strip of the runway off to my right. Too far. A wave of horror washed through me as I realized I'd never glide to the runway before the fire consumed me. I tilted the yoke and veered toward an empty grass field just beyond the airport perimeter. A crash landing on open ground was my only shot now. Smoke was pouring into the cockpit, a thick gray veil streaming from the cracks around the instrument panel. I coughed hard, each inhale like swallowing hot ash. My eyes burned, and I had to squint to see. Through the haze I ran through the engine fire emergency checklist by pure instinct. Fuel shut-off valve out, cut the gas supply. Magnetos off, kill the sparks. Battery master off. I swiped toggles and pulled levers in a blur. The roar from the engine died as I turned it off entirely, leaving only the rush of wind and the hungry crackle of flames. I hoped depriving the fire of fresh fuel might slow it down, but looking at the horror ahead of me, it was clearly too late for that. Altitude 700 feet. 600. I was still too high and too fast. I pushed the nose down slightly to maintain glide speed, aiming for the field. My brain was racing as hot as the flames. Even if I managed a controlled crash landing, the plane would likely be engulfed by fire the moment it stopped. I might survive the impact, only to burn alive, trapped by a jammed harness or crumpled metal. The thought of being conscious, injured, and unable to escape the flames spurred a new level of determination and terror in me. At roughly 500 feet, I felt the fire breach something vital. A whoosh of heat rolled over my feet, and I glanced down to see flames licking around my pedals. The carpeting on the floor had ignited. Fire was inside the cockpit. A primal bolt of fear shot through me. I lifted my legs instinctively, but I still had to control the rudder. The pain came a second later, a searing burn across my ankles where my pant legs had caught fire. I yelped and stomped, desperately trying to smother the flames on my clothes, even as I kept my left hand death-gripped on the yoke. The stink of burning rubber and flesh told me the awful truth. My feet were literally burning. A scream tore from my throat, raw hoarse, filled with pure panic. For a moment the plane wobbled, and I almost lost control as agony overwhelmed me. But some survival instinct roared back. No. Hold it together. I forced my eyes back up and my mind back to flying. The wings leveled out as I steadied the yoke. 400 feet now. The field was dead ahead, rushing up fast. I realized with grim clarity that I might not survive this, at least not by any conventional means. I had one last desperate option. Get out of the plane before it hit the ground. Jump. It went against every instinct. Every pilot is trained to stay with the aircraft as long as possible, but this wasn't a normal emergency. This was a race with death, and death was winning. If I could somehow exit the cockpit while the plane was still a few dozen feet up, maybe I could separate myself from the inevitable explosion. It was a terrible gamble. Jumping from even 20 or 30 feet at speed could be fatal. But staying guaranteed a far worse fate. My heart pounded with cold resolve. I was going to jump. Altitude 300 feet. There was no more time for doubt. I took a quick breath, it came out a ragged cough, and unlatched my harness. My fingers fumbled from the burns, but I screamed at myself to focus and got the buckle free. Now the only thing keeping me in my seat was gravity and a little bit of sheer terror. The plane was gliding in a shallow descent maybe 100 feet above the field, giving me a few more seconds. I needed to slow down more. If we were going too fast when I jumped, I'd be smashed like an insect. I pulled the nose up slightly, trading precious altitude for a touch of drag and slower speed. The aircraft shuddered. Without engine power, she was close to stalling. 100 feet. Go now. I reached across my body with my right hand and shoved the canopy door all the way open. It caught the wind like a sail, nearly ripping from its hinges. A fresh gust of air whooshed in, swirling the smoke and embers around me. I braced a hand on the back of my seat and hoisted myself up, half standing now in the open doorway of the low-flying plane. 50 feet. The ground was a green smear below. Wind tore at my clothes, at my half-exposed body. I got one foot out onto the wing, then the other, crouching low to maintain some balance. The propeller was still windmilling up front, and its backwash slammed into me, blasting me with heat from the still-burning engine. My right side felt like it was being roasted alive. Later I'd learn that side took the worst of my burns in these final seconds. 20 feet. I didn't think, I just jumped. A heartbeat later I slammed into the ground feet first and tumbled violently. The impact was devastating. Pain shot up my legs as I crumpled, and I crashed face first into the dirt. A white flash burst behind my eyes and everything went silent. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was alive or dead. I forced my eyes open. I was sprawled on my belly amid weeds at the edge of the field. Everything hurt. God, everything hurt. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, and my vision was blurred. Miraculously, I was clear of the aircraft. I lifted my head, gasping, and saw the plane, now pilotless, continue another few dozen yards. It skimmed low, barely above the ground, then nosed into the earth with a crumpling crash. The impact was ugly, tearing off a wing and crumpling the fuselage like a tin can. For a split second, I thought perhaps the worst was over. Then came the explosion. A thunderous boom ripped through the air as the wreck ignited in a fireball. I felt the shockwave punch through my body even from a safe distance. It knocked the breath out of my lungs and made the ground tremble beneath me. An angry plume of black smoke and flame mushroomed up, engulfing what remained of the plane. Heat rolled over me in a hot blast, forcing me to turn my face away and curl up to protect myself. It was over. And yet it wasn't, because that was the moment the pain finally overwhelmed me. Before, there had been shock and adrenaline, masking so much. But now an all-consuming wall of agony crashed over me, every nerve and cell screaming. I opened my mouth and a raw, ragged scream tore out, joining the crackling roar of the burning wreck. My skin was on fire, or so it felt. I lifted my right arm and saw the sleeve completely gone, the flesh underneath red-black and blistered. My right shoulder was a mess of raw tissue and charred cloth still smoking. My legs. I couldn't even look at them long. Below the knees, my pants were mostly burned away and the skin was charred and peeling. Searing pain radiated from them, worse than anything I'd ever imagined. My face throbbed and burned as well. Half of it had been exposed to the fire, and I could feel the tight, raw sensation of burned flesh on my cheek and scalp. I tried to push myself up to a crawl, but a lightning bolt of pain shot through my right shoulder and chest, sending me flat again. Something was very wrong inside me, too. When I inhaled, a sharp pain deep in my belly made me almost black out. I coughed and tasted blood in my mouth. My nose was clearly broken as well, judging by the crunch I'd felt and the blood streaming from it. I lay back, wheezing, limbs splayed at awkward angles. Black smoke from the crash drifted over, casting a pall on the bright sky. Shock was beginning to set in. I felt myself shaking uncontrollably, a chill creeping over me even as waves of heat still rolled off the burning wreckage. I'm going to die here, I realized with a strangely calm certainty. It was a miracle I'd survived the jump and the explosion, but my body was shattered and burning and bleeding. No one could survive this. I'd seen soldiers die from far less. A distant part of me was amazed I was even still conscious. In the distance, I vaguely registered alarm sirens starting to wail. Maybe the tower had seen the crash and called emergency services. It didn't matter. They'd never get here in time. Each passing second, the world felt more distant. My vision was narrowing, darkening at the edges. The pain was still there, but in a muffled way now, as if my brain were giving up on processing it. I didn't want to die. My mind balked at the idea of simply ending on this field in some foreign country, far from everyone I loved. And I was afraid, so deeply afraid. But a peculiar peace was also creeping in. Maybe this was inevitable. Maybe it was meant to be quick now. In a bizarre moment of clarity, I had the urge to do one last thing properly. Call it a soldier's habit or just a strange whim of a dying mind. With trembling, clumsy fingers, I began to untie my sneakers. It was an absurd thing to focus on, but it gave me a task, something small I could still control. After a struggle, I got my shoes off, then my socks. I placed them neatly side by side in the grass next to me. A faint, bitter laugh escaped my cracked lips as I thought, won't be needing those where I'm going. It was morbidly funny, in a way only a soldier might appreciate. Task done, I lay back and stared at the sky. It was so blue and beautiful, the kind of sky I'd dreamed of flying in. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tears leaked from the corners of my eyes, sliding over my burns. I thought of my mom and dad, how devastated they'd be. I thought of my grandfather, and wondered if I'd see him again soon, perhaps somewhere above those clouds. I felt sorry I wouldn't get to tell him that I did fly, and that I tried my best to live. The shriek of sirens grew louder. Maybe fire trucks, or an ambulance rushing over the field. I could vaguely hear shouting voices now. My fading heart gave a tiny lurch of hope. Perhaps I wasn't entirely alone. But I had almost no strength left. The world was tilting, sounds warping oddly as my consciousness flickered. Through the encroaching haze, I felt strong hands on me, voices yelling things I couldn't quite make out. My eyes refused to open now, but I sensed shadows of people above me. Cool oxygen flowed into my nose from a mask someone placed on me. I wanted to cry with relief. It felt so good to breathe clean oxygen after all that smoke. The relief was short-lived as pain flooded back in when they started moving me. I think I screamed or moaned. I'm not sure. Hang on, buddy. We've got you, a voice said near my ear. Could they really save me? I wanted to hold on. I tried for a few more seconds, but the darkness was too strong. I let it take me, the world turning silent and black as the cacophony of rescuers faded away. BR/. Mercifully, I remember nothing of the next few hours. The paramedics and firefighters did manage to keep me alive, barely. They later told me I had been airlifted to Orlando Regional Medical Center in critical condition, my heart on the verge of giving out. The trauma team intubated me, flooded me with fluids and painkillers, and rushed me into surgery within minutes of arrival. But I was already drifting far beyond consciousness by then. In fact, I would remain in a dark, dreamless limbo for a long time. The doctors induced a coma to spare me the agony and to give my body a fighting chance. For weeks, then months, I lay suspended between life and death, unaware of time or anything else. They gave me a 5% chance of survival. 5%. Essentially, I was all but gone. My burns covered over 60% of my body, 3rd degree and 4th degree in places, the latter meaning down to the bone. My lungs were damaged from smoke inhalation. I was on a ventilator. I'd broken multiple bones on impact. A fractured skull, shattered nose, broken eye sockets, a busted collarbone, cracked ribs. The force of hitting the ground had ruptured my intestines and lacerated my liver, causing massive internal bleeding that the surgeons struggled to control. In the ICU, I battled kidney failure, septic infections, pneumonia. You name it. By all metrics, I was not supposed to live. But I did. Somehow I did. The first flickers of awareness came half a year later. I started surfacing from the coma like a diver slowly rising out of deep water. Sounds became voices. A hazy light pressed against my eyelids. I had no sense of who or where I was. Everything was pain and confusion. I drifted in and out for days, maybe weeks. One day I opened my eyes, truly opened them, and found myself in a hospital room. At least, that's what I pieced together from the sterile white walls, the machines beeping around me, the tubes running into my arms. I couldn't move much at all. When I tried to speak, nothing came out but a croak. A tube was down my throat. A nurse quickly appeared at my side as I began to panic, gently explaining that I was on a ventilator, and not to fight it. I was alive, but I was broken. Those early days of consciousness were a blur of surgeries, procedures, and heavy medications. I was weaned off the ventilator and able to breathe on my own after a while, but every breath hurt. Every inch of me hurt. I was swaddled in bandages from head to toe. When they eventually removed the last of the sedation and I was fully awake, a surgeon carefully explained the litany of my injuries and the surgeries I'd undergone. It was overwhelming to hear, almost impossible to believe. I just lay there and silently cried as he told me about the skin grafts over much of my body, the metal fixators holding some of my broken bones together, the long scars on my belly from emergency abdominal surgery. I had become some patchwork approximation of a human, held together by staples, sutures, and sheer will. The first time I really saw myself, was about a week after I'd woken up. A nurse, sweet as an angel, all those nurses were, was changing the dressings on my face and neck, and she gave me a hand mirror. I think she thought I was ready. I doubt anything could have prepared me for that sight. I looked in the mirror and a stranger stared back. One side of my face was a swollen mask of skin grafts, shiny and red and taut. The other side was yellowed with healing bruises and lacerations. My hair was gone, all shaved off or singed away, except for some patchy stubble. I looked like a burn victim. There's no softer way to put it. I was a burn victim who had barely survived, and now that image was seared into my mind. I remember tears blurring the reflection. I wanted to scream or smash the mirror or wake up from this nightmare and find my old self whole and smiling. Instead, I handed the mirror back and turned away, choking on sobs. The nurse wiped my tears with a gauze pad and kept on working in silence. Thus began the hardest chapter of my life, recovery. I spent 4 months in that Orlando hospital before I was stable enough to be flown back to the UK. There, I was moved to a specialized burns unit at Chelmsford and later to Stoke Mandeville Hospital for a longer rehabilitation. In total, I was an inpatient for nearly 2 years. 2 years. I underwent surgery after surgery, more than 60 operations under general anesthesia by the end of it. Skin grafts, scar releases, reconstructive surgeries, procedures to break up scar tissue and improve mobility. It seemed endless. But piece by piece, they were rebuilding me. Physical pain was my constant companion. Even with medication, daily wound care was excruciating. During dressing changes, I sometimes screamed or even cursed and thrashed in agony, always apologizing after. The nurses understood and remained patient, but it was hell for all of us. Learning to move again was an ordeal all its own. I had been strong and athletic once, fit as a butcher's dog, as we'd say in the army, but now I was frail, weak as a baby bird. Months of lying in bed had withered my muscles, and the burns, especially on my legs and right arm, left areas of raw pain and stiffness that made any motion torturous. I'll never forget the day they helped me stand up for the first time. It was roughly 6 weeks after the accident. 2 physical therapists flanked me as I gripped a walker. My legs trembled uncontrollably. I wasn't sure they could bear my weight. Bit by bit, I eased my feet to the floor and pushed up. Fiery pain tore through my half-healed skin grafts. I gasped, and tears immediately spilled down my cheeks. But I was standing. For 10 seconds, I stood on my own 2 feet, shaking, sweat pouring down my face from effort and agony. When they eased me back into the wheelchair, I sobbed like a child, but not all the tears were from pain. Some were relief, even joy. I was broken, but not beyond repair. I was alive. Of course, progress was painfully slow. There were setbacks and complications. Infections that sent me back to surgery, scar tissue that had to be operated on again. Every day was a fresh battle. In the gym learning to walk, in the hospital ward fighting pain, and in my own head fighting despair. Because the physical challenges were only part of it. Mentally and emotionally, I was in a very dark place. I had always thought of myself as tough. I'd been through harsh military training, seen a bit of combat, pushed past fear many times. But nothing prepared me for the long, lonely fight of recovery. Some nights, after everyone had left and the lights were dim, I'd lie in my hospital bed and silently cry. I felt like my old life had died in that cockpit fire. The confident, able-bodied man I'd been was gone. What remained was a scarred, pain-ridden shell who needed help to perform the simplest tasks. There were times I wished I hadn't survived. I was ashamed of that feeling, but it was true. One afternoon, a doctor came on rounds and found me in a particularly low mood. He made a comment about how lucky I was to have survived, and I couldn't hold it in. I rasped out, "Lucky? I'm a monster. I wish I'd died." There was stunned silence. I regretted it the second it left my mouth, but I also meant it in that moment. The doctor composed himself and said quietly, "You've been through something unimaginable. But you're here, and you're alive for a reason. It's our job to help you see it." I didn't respond. I just turned my face away and closed my eyes, tears leaking out. My family visited as often as they could. My parents were unwavering in their support, though I could see the grief written on their faces each time they walked into my hospital room. They tried to hide it, tried to be cheerful and encouraging, but a mother knows when her child is hurting, and my mom's eyes betrayed her heartbreak. I hated that, hated being the cause of their pain and worry. Friends came too, including several of my SAS buddies. They'd show up with loud voices and easy smiles, regaling me with stories from the regiment or harmless gossip to lift my spirits. Sometimes it worked. Other times, after they left, I'd feel an even deeper ache, longing for the days when I was whole and running around with them on adventures. I struggled with depression and PTSD. Nightmares of the crash plagued me whenever I managed to sleep. I'd jolt awake in a sweat, convinced I was back in that burning cockpit, the smell of smoke still in my nose. More than once a nurse ran in because I was screaming in my sleep. In those moments of terror and confusion, I sometimes truly believed I had died and gone to some kind of personal hell. But I hadn't died. I was alive, and gradually, oh so gradually, my body and mind began to remember what living felt like. Little did I know that hope was on the horizon, even if it was hard to see from that pit of despair. My journey wasn't over yet, and not by a long shot. My salvation came in small steps and unexpected opportunities. During my long rehabilitation, I got involved with a support group for injured veterans. I met men and women who'd lost limbs or been paralyzed, who had been through their own private hells and come out the other side determined to live. Their resilience sparked something in me. If they could find purpose and joy again, maybe I could too. One afternoon about 2 years after the crash, a therapist handed me a brochure for a special adventure program. It offered wounded veterans a chance to challenge themselves with activities like climbing, diving, and even flying. One option immediately caught my eye, learning to fly a hot air balloon. It sounded crazy given my lingering nightmares about fire and heights, yet something about that gentler form of flight called to me. Perhaps it was exactly what I needed, a way to return to the sky without the roar of an engine or the fear of flames. Gathering my courage, I applied for the hot air balloon pilot scholarship. To my astonishment, I won it. In the spring of 2010, I traveled to Tuscany, Italy for a balloon pilot training camp. It was my first time leaving the country, or even my hometown since the accident, and I was equal parts excited and terrified. On the flight to Italy, I gripped the armrests hard during takeoff, heart pounding until we were safely at cruising altitude. But I got through it, step by step. Tuscany was like a dream. The rolling green hills, the vineyards, the golden light. On my first day at the launch field, I met my instructor, Lorenzo, who radiated a calm confidence. He showed me the hot air balloon we'd be training with, a massive multicolored envelope of fabric laid out on the grass, attached to a sturdy wicker basket. When they ignited the propane burner to inflate the balloon, I'll admit I flinched. The whoosh of flame and the blast of heat were unnervingly familiar triggers. For a moment I stood there, heart hammering, watching that plume of fire roar into the balloon's mouth, and I was back in the cockpit mentally. My scars seemed to tingle. Lorenzo stepped over and put a hand on my shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "Nothing to fear here." I forced myself to nod and breathe. This fire was controlled, purposeful. It was lifting something, not destroying it. I repeated that in my head as I watched the balloon swell and stand upright. On our first tether descent, as the ground fell away a few dozen feet, I clung to the basket's edge with white knuckles. But the ride was silky smooth, nothing like an airplane or a parachute jump. There was no engine noise, just the occasional gentle roar of the burner and the distant sounds of dogs barking and farm tractors far below. The world spread out beneath us in a peaceful panorama of orchards and tiled roofs. Despite my fear, I found myself smiling, truly smiling. By the end of that week, I completed my first solo flight in the hot air balloon. In the quiet dawn light, with Lorenzo coaching me via radio from the ground, I piloted the balloon on my own over the Tuscan countryside. As I drifted over a sun-dappled valley, the vineyards and villages miniaturized below, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't flying with roaring engines and adrenaline. I was floating, cradled by the wind. Up there, I whispered a shaky thank you to whatever higher power might be listening. Because in that moment, I felt like me again, reborn in the sky. That flight didn't erase my pain or my scars, but it was a turning point. It was proof that the sky could still welcome me, that I could still find freedom above the earth on my own terms. In the years since, I've continued to heal and even accomplish things I never imagined during those dark hospital nights. I carry permanent scars and some limitations. I'll never be exactly the man I was, but I've made peace with that. I eventually even climbed back into a small airplane as a passenger, heart hammering, just to prove to myself I could. I discovered new passions as well, from scuba diving beneath the ocean to mentoring fellow wounded veterans. And of course, I continue to find freedom floating among the clouds in a hot air balloon whenever I can. Not every day is easy. I'd be lying if I said I never have flashbacks or down days. Sometimes a sudden smell of smoke will send my heart racing, or I'll wake from a nightmare of falling. The difference now is that I know those moments will pass. I have a life, a full, rich life, that I fought tooth and nail to rebuild. And it's absolutely worth living. Looking back, it's hard to fathom the journey. From the boy who fell in love with airplanes at Luton, to the man engulfed in fire, to the survivor piecing himself back together. Sometimes I stand in the balloon's basket at dawn and reflect. In the cool silence before I pull the burner toggle, I can almost sense that wide-eyed child I once was standing beside me, reminding me why I held on to life and to this dream. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the crisp morning air and the faint hint of propane. Below me, the world is still, bathed in the golden light of sunrise. I pull the burner lever, and a bright flame roars upward, filling the balloon with heat. Slowly, gently, the ground releases us and we rise. My heart, scarred and strong, soars with us. I am flying. I am free.